Welcome back. The woes for Indian flyers seems to be only mounting. Indigo flyers claim that they were made to sit inside an aircraft for over an hour without AC. Then after taxiing at the runway, returned to the Terminal 2. Indigo has claimed that this was due to high ground temperatures, but wonder why weren't other Indigo aircraft or other airlines affected with high ground temperatures. But this is just one part. Remember, waiting inside the aircraft without the AC switched on is not a first in itself. Woes at the Tata Group also seem to be only on the rise, or Air India for that matter. From what were weeks of passengers being stranded at airports amid protests by crew members at the Air India Express, now the scanner seems to be on food. A passenger, Mr. Paul, on board the Bengaluru-San Francisco recently stated that he found a blade in the food that was served to him, and he posted a picture on that as well, and that's on your screens. A little longish thing that you see on your bowl. I realized it was in my food and I chewed it for 2 or 3 seconds. As soon as I spat it out, I realized that the object was a blade. What the object was. The stewardess apologized for exactly 3 seconds and came back with a bowl of chickpeas. He also adds it is dangerous to have a blade on any flight. Second, it could have cut through my tongue. Third, what if a child was eating this food? Well, we are glad none of this happened. In fact, just relieved that none of this happened, but the fact remains, finding a blade on an aircraft in a food is absolutely unacceptable. But if that was the only thing, we could have treated it as an isolated case as well. We have another passenger who adds a series of photographs, Vineet, and he shares few photographs, claims that his journey on Air India 105 was a nightmare. From the flight delay to poor seats, flat beds, uncooked food, stale fruits, and broken luggage. And then he shares a series of inconveniences he faced during this flight. That's up on your screens as well. Air India has responded to Mr. Paul. The airline has said that a foreign object was found in the meal of a guest and that it has been identified as coming from the vegetable processing machine used at the facilities of its catering partner. And the airline has vowed to strengthen measures to prevent any recurrence, including more frequent checking of the processor. Again, relieved to know about this response, but the truth remains something in a foreign object being found in a bowl of food, particularly with the Air India, isn't a first as well. A survey by local circles asking for responses to flyers on issues while flying Vistara or Air India in the last 3 years has ranked timeliness, staff attitude, customer service, food quality, and quality and maintenance of aircraft as the top concern. Before we go to our panelists, let's just go across to my colleague Nikhil at this point. Nikhil, where are you right now, Nikhil? Wherever you might be, you may just be very relieved that you possibly have got an Air India response, which does apologize. But the big question that many would have been asking you since you cover aviation is how is the aviation sector really looking at tackling this, particularly Air India in this particular case, because there seems to be a series of tweets that seem to put them on the dock.
So, Sneha, this is one of the pertinent questions which you have raised right here, because we have sought answers a couple of times from the Aviation Ministry and from the experts as well. When these kind of incidents are usually reported, either you take the today's example where the sharp metal-like object has been found a few days back when a worm-like object was found inside the sandwich at the Indigo flight. But the aviation experts, particularly the aviation ministry, usually says that this is the reflection of the increase in the number of passengers. They just see it with that particular ratio. But the obligation lies on the side of the airlines, because they charge a hefty price when it comes to the airline tickets, which the Ram Mohan Naidu have already said that he is going to review the price. So when you are going to pay huge bucks, then you are receiving this kind of services. This is something which is very much disappointing. In fact, we have reached out in person to the affected passenger, wherein he has said that after flagging the incident to the Air India, they reached out to him in the very first place, and they have also offered him about the services which are usually taken in the Air India aircraft, and a one-side journey is allowed for him particularly for the business class at any route which is served by the Air India, but he politely refused it, saying that it more appears like a bribe. So this is something which has been experienced from the side of the customer. But now, as we speak, Sneha, a fresh reaction
Right.
has also come out, a fresh statement, so to say, from the side of the catering services which provide to the Air India flights. They have also said that they apologize for the incident which have taken place, and they have made sure that each and every inspection is done thoroughly to avoid any of the recurrence as far as these kind of incidents are reported. But imagine the kind of injury that would have possibly taken midair if the victim passenger would have consumed it inside him. Back to you.
Right. You're raising some very important issues, and you've also got a response right now, latest at it. And it's interesting, Nikhil, ironic also, because it's not something that is outsourced by Air India particularly. And we're talking about Air India because they have their own wing as such that would really look into all of this. But thank you very much, Nikhil, for joining us. With all those details, let me also introduce my panel at this point. Sachin Tiparia, who is the founder for Local Circles. Bejon Misra, who's a consumer rights activist. Devesh Agrawal, who's a chief analyst. The Bangalore-Aviation.com. Thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us. Let me just come to you at this point, Mr. Bejon Misra. How do you really look at this, one as a frequent flyer, as a consumer rights activist? Are these instances to be taken as stray instances and let it go? TK, I mean, like you heard my colleague report right now that some experts say numbers are exploding and therefore you have one odd instances of this happening. Remember, many years back, you had cockroach and then you had another insect in different airlines for that matter. But these are instances. So do you see them as isolated, or how should consumers, flyers really be looking at this?
See, Sneha, when we fly as passengers, we are assured of certain minimum standard and quality, for which we pay the amount which is asked to us, which is again variable as per market forces. Unfortunately, there are three regulators who have an oversight on the passengers' amenities, facilities, and quality. Number one, the Ministry of Aviation, where Directorate of Civil Aviation are the responsible regulator to look after their functioning and their efficiency in terms of quality of service. Then comes the Food Safety Authority, which looks into the kitchen, which looks into all the food which is being served to the passengers. That's the authority which is supposed to be looking into these issues of quality of food, the protocols, the standard practices, the good practices in terms of kitchen, good practices in terms of packaged food to be served to the passengers. The third regulator is the Department of Consumer Affairs, which comes under the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, where we have a regulator called Central Consumer Protection Authority. Now, all these three regulators are supposed to look into these issues concerning quality of service. And let me tell you, today, none of the authorities, which are regulators, to look into these issues, are looking at any point of time in terms of doing surveillance and surprise checks, in terms of quality of food, in terms of timeliness, in terms of whatever has been brought out in terms of a limited manner, in terms of the percentage of people who have responded to the questionnaire or the questions
Mr. Bejon, Mr. Bejon Misra, I'll just get back to you. You're making some very important points, but we have somebody very interesting who could give a perspective and even respond to the points that you're raising. I'm also being joined by Devesh Agrawal at this point. Devesh Agrawal, I mean, and if I can have my colleagues just put up the graphics that we did for the comparative fares of Air India vis-a-vis the other flights for a particular sector. Now, we just did a fair comparison of the numbers to see whether Air India is cheaper or not, and you have it up in your screens. Not much of a difference. It's not like Air India is much cheaper than other airlines that are flying. And we saw just one segment. We saw Delhi to New York for that matter. So we just did a fair comparison of where do the fares rank. Now, Devesh Agrawal, if I can ask you this question. Fares are not very cheap. People are paying for the services. Of course, there was a national pride associated with Air India. Many still prefer the Air India given a choice. But looks what's unfolding on the ground. You have food that one person said had a blade. You had another case where you had food where the person in the tweet at least has said passengers returned. We don't know what the truth of that is. Nonetheless, a flyer has alleged that many people returned their fruits because it was apparently smelling. He's also gone on to say that the seats were not functioning, the recliners were not working, the screens were not working. Again, these are not things that we are hearing for the first time, but what's really wrong?
Hi, thank you firstly for having me. I'm going to request you for about a couple of minutes. What Mr. Mishra said makes a lot of sense. The first and fundamentally, like for instance, you mentioned the Indigo flight that got stuck. There are conditions what are called hot and high. This affects engine performance. So that can be a reason why if they have filled up the flight and the temperature has reached a certain level, now the flight is just too heavy to take off. The engines can't, take the plane off the ground safely. But having said that, having no ground power unit to provide air conditioning, that is an absolute no-no. The problem in India is we still do not have a proper consumer law protecting passengers. We have a law called the Passenger Charter. You're welcome. You can just Google it, you can download it. And you see the number of exemptions that are given to airlines. One feels that this is not a document written by the ministry. It is a document written by the airlines and given to the ministry to give to the public. So that is the first point I think we need to attack, because still the airlines are not held responsible for their actions. They are not going to improve. Okay, jitna, as much of that chalta hai will work, whatever the cheapest they can get away with, they will get it. It's natural business practice. And so we definitely need a stronger consumer law. Coming back to this thing about the food, I am actually horrified that the blade came and then they say that we'll check the vegetable processor because 99% this particular flight would have been catered by Air India SATS, which is part of Singapore Airlines Terminal Services.
That's
it's a
true.
joint venture with the Tatas and, it's Taj SATS, not Air India SATS. My apology. Air India SATS is the ground handler. Taj SATS is the flight kitchen. So the Taj Group, I mean, if you see the Taj hotels in India enjoy a fabulous reputation. Singapore Airlines enjoys a fabulous reputation in Singapore. And I know that all food is normally put through a metal detector to find out exactly these kinds of things. This is a dangerous thing. It's outright dangerous in multiple ways. And I'm very, very shocked that this particular food item has gone through a metal detector and not been detected. That's a big piece of metal. It's not, one chota pinhead or something that could have been this thing. So that is bad.
That's
And
a valid
as far
point
as you
as well.
mentioned,
That's true as well.
last point. I would tell people that who are complaining about Air India, I fully agree with you. On the international sector, the fares across airlines are virtually very similar. And I tell people, listen, Air India right now is not worth flying. They have got too many problems. And the only way to put a message across to the management of Air India is to stop flying that airline. They really, really, really need to get their act
How
together.
unfortunate.
It has been more than 2 years, and I find it very, very hard to accept that such a professional and a well-respected organization like the Tatas can't get their act together in more than 2 years. It's simply not acceptable. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Sachin Taparia, now, Air India did come out and issue an apology. You have the catering staff also that has now, the catering partners that have also now gone out and issued apology saying that we are sorry, we are going to strengthen our process. Well, they've at least owned up to that, but nothing much that they couldn't have done, because there was a picture also which was out on social media. But interestingly, a few months back, you did run a survey on passengers, the challenges or the issues that they face while they fly. Tell us about it.
So Shreya, what we did do here, Sneha, was we ran a survey on all airlines, not just Air India. And on Air India and Vistara, the key issues that came out was basically, poor aircraft quality and aircraft maintenance, and cleanliness. These were the top two issues. Then we had, issues like food quality, we had issues like baggage handling, information, making information available transparently. These are all consumer issues that people were concerned about when it came to Air India and Vistara, mostly Air India. And the big thing that we are finding, if you compare this to a decade back, for instance, there was a lot of chalta hai attitude, within Air India. And that, unfortunately, despite the Tata takeover, that still continues to take. That's the core problem. That that attitude of, and I'll give you a personal instance here that my co-panelists may associate with. I was on an Air India flight in the first decade of this century, and it was a long flight. Los Angeles to Frankfurt, Frankfurt to Delhi. They ran out of food, out of vegetarian food. So I was told that they have no food, and then they found a non-vegetarian tray which they provided to me, and it was provided to me as if they are doing a favor. So I think that approach itself is where the issue lies. Of course, in addition to all the food safety issues that my previous panelists talked about, this chalta hai attitude has to change. And till that doesn't change, and Vistara was a classic example. They had a lot of things going well for them. Unfortunately, what is happening is that the Vistara is getting absorbed under the Air India model as opposed to vice versa. What should have happened is they should have learned from the smaller airlines and used those best practices and brought them to Air India. But that hasn't happened. So I think they've got to go back, take a hard look at how both airlines are functioning, strengthen all these processes and gaps. But then more than that, change the attitude of the staff, retrain them, reorient them, make them, more empowered. That's another huge issue where they almost, no one can take decisions without approvals of several layers of people. I think that has got to change, right? In this case, also the business class free ticket was offered, several days later, only after the issue came on social media, right? So that just shows that a lot needs to be done in terms of customer service and re-engineering and fixing things at Air India.
Right. I mean, such valid points, really, for that matter. Mr. Bejon Misra, while you said that there is so much that, Fliers can do, what about the airlines? Is there a sense that airlines, and this question is to both of you for that matter, Mr. Bejon Misra as well as Devesh Agrawal, how is the aviation sector looking at this? That's something I can ask Devesh Agrawal. But Bejon Misra, do you really think that the aviation sector seems to be taking these things for granted?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you will be happy to know that I had filed a PIL before the Honorable High Court in Delhi when Jet Airways raised their hands and went bankrupt, and thousands of passengers were not given their refund. And similar things happened now with Go First, and it's been happening since Kingfisher and all that. And the story is that the regulator is just keeping quiet. The regulator has to wake up and actually give a good kind of a reprimand them, not only by sending so-called notices, but ensuring that the passengers are compensated for all kinds of deficiencies in service and all kinds of substandard service being provided to the passengers. Now it is the job, and that's why I mentioned the
Right.
Central Consumer Protection Authority, which has come into force in 2019 under the new law, has all the powers to go on behalf of the passengers to sue these companies and claim compensation on behalf of the passengers, which is not happening. And it's a good honeymoon going on between the ministries. Now, what we all need to know is that these regulators are not supposed to be keeping quiet. And the scare is what I have been told, and in my petition before the High Court, what the order we got is we don't want to give a strict order to the airlines because then the business would suffer and passengers will not get the facility of air travel in a competitive manner. Now, that is not an argument. In my view,
Right.
the argument is, we have to get the value for money. And if we don't get the value for money, and when we complain about it, the resolution has to be prompt without going through the cumbersome judicial system of claiming compensation, for amounts like 10,000 or 20,000 rupees. You can't wait for 20 years to get that claim,
Okay.
and then when you get that claim, it is much less than what you would have spent to claim that money. So it should be such that
That's
the
right.
regulations should be
That's
very
right.
strict. The regulator should be very strong. The regulator has to be effective. The regulator has to be
And that's a point that
pro-passenger.
several panelists have raised every time we have done a discussion around this. That's one point that all experienced panelists have raised repeatedly. It's a thing that experts have raised. So we really hope regulators are watching this. Devesh Agrawal, if you could give us an insider's perspective, because we all are outsiders, quite frankly. But if you can give us an insider's perspective, how is the aviation sector looking at all of these things? I mean, you have people waiting, stranded at the airports for hours. Many of them are not given feasible alternatives, for that matter, for what's happening with the food, for the international, what many seem to claim a second-class treatment for the Indian flyer, for sectors that otherwise would be flown. I mean, I don't know how much of this is true, but this is again tales that come across from flyers who are flying different sectors. There are others about how the seats don't function, and this is not to one airline, but how do aviation insiders, airline insiders really look at these things?
See, as I said, I'll be honest with you. I'm kind of at the straddling point of, not quite within the aviation industry, but still a frequent flyer, and I watch the industry and I know kind of what's happening. And I told you, see, I'll use two simple examples. Both mature markets, you take Europe and you take the United States. In the United States, the consumer virtually has no protection. In Europe, there is a law called EU 261. It's a regulation which clearly spells out if your flight is delayed by this is what the airline must do. The Indian passenger charter, I will not name the airline. I had an airline executive once turn around and tell me that I can pay a passenger compensation in monopoly money and I will have met the terms of that passenger charter. Now, that is how weak that document is. It has got so many exemptions, and where the airline is supposed to pay a compensation, there is no specified time frame that yes, you're going to pay within this time frame, and this is what you will pay it by. And if you don't do it, this is the penalty. There is absolutely, I told you, that document appears to be written by the airline and given to the ministry that please put this out. It is till the ministry realizes, and if you see our new civil aviation minister, his first words are what? I want to make air travel like railway travel. I mean, we have enough issues in railway travel, and I will tell you that Indian fares, at least within the country, are probably half to 66% of what they are overseas, even though the costs of the aircraft and the fuel, etc., are almost the same. At best, they probably save is on labor and their own efficiency. So the first thing I would urge the minister to do is take a look at how to improve what when an airline fails, it should automatically get penalized, and it should get penalized heavily. Then the fares might go up a little bit. If you recall, when there was a volcano in Iceland and the European courts ruled against Ryanair, Ryanair threatened, oh, the fares are going to go up. We will stop flying. Guess what? The fares did not go up. They did not stop flying. So don't respond to idle threats of the industry would be my urging to the ministry. Their duty first is to the passengers of India. They have to come up with a better law so that airlines don't take passengers for granted.
Devesh Agrawal, I'm just left with a minute. I have to go to Sachin Taparia. Sachin Taparia, you were mentioning about how the other airlines, you had given out a survey for all airlines, and what we mentioned was Air India and Vistara, but the response was from flyers across the segment. Was there any difference as such in the prioritization or the key concerns, or was it common across the airlines?
No, it was different, Sneha, actually. If you look at Indigo, timeliness was a much smaller concern. It was more around staff attitude and courteousness and customer service and how they were handling customers, basically. If you remember the last 2-3 years, there have been a lot of episodes where people have written on social media,
Yes.
the lack of courteousness by Indigo staff. So that was highlighted actually. And SpiceJet, of course, was timeliness and
Right.
a combination of issues. But the key, concern there is that, look, the food is overpriced. In some cases, a 20 rupee Maggie box is being charged at 400 rupees in the air. So if you get a
Right.
bug inside that box, it's definitely a problem.
Absolutely.
Because one, you're charging 20 times, you are violating all the legal metrology rules. Mr. Mishra is on the panel. And unfortunately, there is no accountability for it. So I think that the core issue here is
Right.
need for an aviation consumer regulator. Maybe you could join the two regulators and form a committee
Right.
or
No,
form a
you're making
group
such
that
important
focuses.
points, and I'm glad there's at least local circles who's been doing these surveys, so we have a place where all of these things come together. So Sachin Taparia, as well as Bejon Mishra and Devesh Agrawal, thank you very much for joining us. And even as Modi Government 3.0 begins its work, we just hope we are able to add to what difference they can make.